Well, hello, everybody. We are ready to get started. I want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Morris, and I'm with MadCap Software. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Vrej Hezerin, who's a technical writer with CM Labs Simulations in Montreal, Quebec. Vrej is going to talk us through and kind of go through the whys and the hows of how he and his team made the journey from a DITA-based workflow to MadCap Flare and how the effort led to a more streamlined and efficient approach to creating, managing, and publishing all of their technical documentation and their user guides and their online help and all of that fun stuff. So welcome, Vrej. We are thrilled to have you with us today to talk about this.
Hi.
Hi, yeah, thanks. And we have a lot to cover. So just a couple housekeeping items before we jump in. So have to go to there you go. Thank you so much. So again, reminder for everyone, this will be recorded. So if you have to pop out early, not to worry. We're going to be sending out a recording to everybody who registered. So you'll be receiving that. I also want to remind everybody that you have the ability to ask questions. And there's a little chat window there where you can post questions during the webinar. We won't be stopping in the middle to take them, but towards the end, after we get through all of the slides, if we have time, we'll do our best to get to the questions that come in. And whatever we don't get to in the live session today, we'll be compiling a question and answer document and sending it out to everybody who registered as well. So that's it. I know we've got a lot to cover today, so
Mhm.
we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So Vrej, as we sort of begin and set the stage a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company. What is it that you do there, and tell us about the software that you document.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Of course.
My name is Vrej Hezeran. I'm a technical writer at CM Labs. I've been here since about 3.5 years, and I first started doing tech writing in 2007. Um, I'm from Montreal, as you can see in the little picture, and I have a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. So I have a little bit of coding background, and I did that for a while, but I changed streams after a little bit, and I found tech writing, and I've been sticking with it ever since. And at CM Labs, where I work, it's a company that we do simulation-based solutions. So what that means is, if you're a company that works in automotive or construction, a lot of marine companies or cranes, if you want to simulate these kind of scenarios, and often to train people on rigs or cranes that could be very expensive and dangerous, we provide these the software to simulate an environment, and then also these pods that you could sit in, surrounded by screens, and the controls are very similar to what you'd have in real life. So it would give you a realistic simulation of what it would be like, and so you could train new people on these vehicles or these big machines in a safe way and in a much cheaper way than actually putting them in, like I said, a crane or a big truck or something like that. Um, and so there's really two parts to the company. There's the simulator side, where we do provide these chairs surrounded by monitors and controls, and that's more for training people. But the side I work on is the software side, a software called Vortex Studio. And in this software, you could create these complex scenes. For example, like you could see in the picture here, there's this vehicle at a construction site. You can construct all these things with very realistic physics, and you could customize parts of the vehicles or the scenario down to the tiniest elements and connections to really make it as real as possible. And we really pride ourselves on the physics. Uh, and also, it's a real-time platform here. I think on the next slide. Yeah, so this is a shot of the software that I document. This is Vortex Studio, and it's, like I said, it's a physics-based dynamics engine. And so what you could do is you could customize this and add all kinds of different things to the scenario and vehicles and diggable areas, or you could put an ocean with customizable waves. And the advantage of our software is that you could press the little play button and you can see how it reacts in real time. So immediately you can get your feedback of whether your simulation is as good as you can have it. And you can grab a controller and just play around with the vehicle. It's almost like a video game, and drive around in the scenario. And you can do this all from your machine. It's a very simple way, and because you could uh, really interact in real time, it's a definite advantage over some other simulation platforms where you have to render a scene and it could take a lot of time. And so this software, you could probably guess, is very complex, and there are a lot of different elements you could add and customizations and plenty of fields to fill out, down to the tiniest little uh, bits of the vehicles that connect to each other. So someone needs to document that, and that person is me. And yeah, so I had to make a documentation system that would tell the user how to fill out all these things.
Interesting. Great. So tell us a little bit then, with all of this stuff going on, how are you managing all of your content in it previously before making the migration? If you kind of walk us through the beginning.
Well, when I first got here, we were using the CHM. Well, I call it CHM. So I've heard chum also, but I always call it CHM, which is, I'm sure a lot of you people have seen, like in the screenshot, you could see just a sample of what we had before. This was our old CHM help, and it's really old technology. It hasn't been updated in 20 years, and yet it was 2015, and we're still putting out documentation in this way, and it looks dated. It has to be run off your machine. It can't go online. It's just hard to find anything. The search isn't really that great, and the worse than the output, because I mean at least the information was there, but the process to get this help compiled was pretty tough, and that's when I decided that we had to change something because it was written in uh, XML using the Oxygen XML editor. I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but it's a just an XML editor. And then we would use there'd be a converter actually that we'd use to convert the Oxygen XML into the DITA XML that the Doxygen compiler could then put into an output. And this all predates me, and it predates the person I replaced too. It goes back a couple tech writers. So the information or the logic for why we were doing this was kind of lost by the time I showed up. Um,
Right.
but that's what I got. That's what I had to work with, and it was taking a long time to put out anything. And so I started thinking like, well, I've used Flare in other companies. Maybe it's time to start thinking about modernizing the system.
Great. And so, kind of to expand a little bit on that, tell us a little bit more about some of those challenges. I mean, you were using a sort of this legacy DITA XML based standard.
Hmm.
What other kinds of things were happening with your old process?
Well, if I can see in this slide, I took a picture of some papers I inherited. So I had these stacks of papers written with tiny, tiny words of instructions. All these were instructions of how to build documentation, and I had to go through and highlight the most important parts. It was just this nightmare of batch files, one that would call the other, that would call the other, that would call the other, this maze. And it was so delicate, and the syntax especially was so delicate that the slightest thing that would be off would throw an error, and then your documentation wouldn't build. And when the build takes like 20, 25 minutes, at that time at least, it's a shame that you're waiting all the time, and then right at the end there's an error, and then you have to restart or figure out you have to troubleshoot. So then you have to do a lot of studying in XML or a Doxygen, and because there's so many moving parts, there was the Oxygen that would run through a converter to change some of the syntax into syntax that would be more friendly with the Doxygen compiler. And at any of these stages, if anything didn't match up. For example, your topic name, the title of the topic in XML, had to match the file name, the DITA file name, and if there was the slightest mismatch, it would break something. Um, it was pretty, like I said here, the exact commands, and then the scripts calling the scripts, because it was constructed in such a way that each chapter was its own project. And so there'd be like a master script that would run all these subscripts to put together all these mini CHMs that would then be bundled into the main CHM. And it was just so hard to track anything down. And especially, we reorder our content a lot. as we're adding new features. Sometimes a feature goes from one part of the software to another. So there's a lot of reordering, and just that reordering was difficult also because just the way it was structured in XML, if it was expecting a topic here and then it was suddenly moved somewhere else, it would it would break. And we're having a lot of trouble with images, embedding images on the pages, even though the image was in the right spot and the path was at the right path, it would just not show up for some reason. So for all these reasons, I decided like this was not the way to move forward, especially because our end goal was to one day put this online, to have it freely available on our website instead of making it a little package that user have to download and install in their system. So that's what's really started getting me thinking about, yeah, maybe we should move away from this.
Right. So it sounds like things definitely came to a bit of a head. So tell
hmm
us a little bit more about, about that evaluation process. Tell us about how you came to Flare then and how that process went.
Well, like I said, I'd worked with Flare previously at a previous company, and I mean, it was so simple to use. It's what you see is what you get. A lot of drag and dropping. Um, and we're, like I said, also we're planning eventually to go to a web-based documentation. And so that means an HTML system. And the HTML5 is, the latest and the greatest. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to work with. The search capability is just so quick and responsive. And for my purposes, I do a lot of changes, and I want to see what the page would look like immediately. And in the previous system, I'd have to run an entire build just to see a preview of well, it wasn't a preview at that point, it was the output, just to see what the output would look like at the end of the day. So with Flare, I know there's a little preview button, so you could see what the page is going to look like immediately without having to make an entire build. But even so, making an entire build suddenly took no time at all. It was taking us over 20 minutes to get a build out, and now it's maybe 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to get a build done. Um, and so that's a huge time saver. It's a huge time saver. And on top of that, reviews were a big deal. Previously, the reviews were done in really informal manner. It would either be a PDF that would be printed out, and then someone would comment on the PDF and send it back, or even worse, a printout, like a hard copy, and it would be passed around to the subject matter experts, and they'd write on the paper and they'd give it back to you. And there's no traceability with that, which is also something that we were going for in the company, traceability of the documentation and the changes from version to version. So I came up with a review system that actually I have a blog about on the MadCap website. The link will come later in this talk. But yeah, definitely streamlined reviews also were a big factor.
Great. So now that we saw a little bit about what you were doing before, you were using the old Chum, which was desktop only, right? It was Windows only, and there wasn't a lot of option for, customization and
hmm
branding. Um, show us a little bit about, if you would, how has that changed? How are things looking now that we're out of the 1990s and we're into the modern day? How are
Modern
things
day.
looking now?
Well, I could show you actually. Let me flip over to what our help used to look like. I dug this up somewhere deep in the bowels of our systems. This is the last version of the help well, the first one I worked on and the last one of this style at CM Labs. So this is CHM help. You can see it looks dated. It starts off as a little window and you have to expand it if you want to see anything. The search isn't very good. The branding, like you mentioned, the branding, we could only brand it by putting our logo on the page. You can't really reskin this thing, or if there was, we hadn't found a way. And then, like I said, it was so finicky, and the slightest little thing would cause an error. So just to show you, if I just want to switch topics, it throws an error, and it's just too much time was spent troubleshooting. It was just too difficult, and it's clear that with Flare, we get a nice output. Like, let me just swap over to my Flare output.
There we
There you
go.
go. So this is, I'll go to the front page. So this is what our help looks like now. It's much cleaner. We are able to brand our own our own colors. This is our gray, this is our green, this is our logo. You could reskin this however you want. We used to have the table of contents down the left side, but more recently we changed it to be a top-down table of contents. We thought that looked better. You could really navigate more easily. The search is very responsive. I could type in something quickly and you get all your hits, and they're really good because sometimes with the CHM help, you'd get false positives. It would give you some answers that were just not what you were looking for. And so with Flare, you get some really good results. The scanning was really important, actually, putting our colors. And I'm sure that's important for any company out there. You want to brand it the way you want to brand it. And I could show you my workspace too, if that's something you want to see. Let me switch over to my Alt tab. There you go. So this is my workspace in Flare. And I don't know how other people might use it, but this is my preferred way. I like having my Content Explorer here. It shows all the files I'm working with in my project. And there's the project organizer over here with my targets, my table of contents and variables, all that stuff. And what I like doing is having my table of contents also over here because I find it's a lot easier to navigate or to find topics I'm looking for once I know where they go. And I've been working with this for so long that I'm pretty good at finding where my topics are. I don't really get lost, but it's a really good visual way to see just how everything's going to look on the output.
I think that's
Sorry?
a good point. I think that's a
Yeah.
great point. I think a lot of people don't know that you can customize your workspace
Oh,
like
for
that.
sure.
And so while the Content Explorer does a really good job of showing you all of your files in the project, it stores things more alphanumerically, right? How they may live on disk, whereas your TOC can be handy to have floated and sort of docked there if you prefer to
Mm-hmm.
work that way, because that's what's going to be presented to the outside world. That's how we organize our topics. And sometimes people are more familiar with their content when they're able to see it laid out how they're used to seeing it in their end result.
Yep.
So being able to float that and customize that can be helpful. I think that's a feature that not a lot of people know that's possible to do.
Well, and like I mentioned before, we often change positions of topics as it changes in the software. So you can just drag and drop any topic wherever you want to put it. That makes it so much faster and easier than the previous way, like in our DITA days. You
Mhm.
can just take this, put it anywhere, and all the internal links will get reordered automatically. It's
Mhm.
just so good. And like you're saying, these are undockable. You could put them wherever you want to put them, on top, on the side, wherever. I like it personally. I like it just right there. But yeah, you could put it wherever. All of these things, whenever you see that this little mark over here, you could put it wherever you want. And I like having my builds on the bottom over here, and with the different tabs, your search results and messages. And this is also handy for me. I often use the find and replace because I'm often working with a lot of images or links, and the easiest way to find it throughout the whole project is just by putting finding source code over here and the whole project, and it'll find everything for me. So if I'm concerned about an image, for example, I'm changing and I want to make sure I've hit every page that makes reference to it, I could easily find it from here. So yeah, this layout really works for me. It makes my job a lot easier, and then I could just make a build from here, and it just takes a couple minutes, and we're ready to go.
Great. That's awesome. Now, you've spent some time making this migration now from the old database system now to Flare. Um, what sorts of benefits have you seen? And kind of a two-parter, really. Tell us a little bit about the feedback you've received, not only from your customers, in terms of moving from the old chum to maybe to this more responsive HTML5. So, again, feedback from your customers, but what kind of feedback did you receive from the internal stakeholders as well? Those who actually funded this whole thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, like I was saying, besides how easy it was to deploy, and I also should mention that when I was going from CHM to Flare, there was a handy CHM importer, so I didn't even have to redo all the work that was already there. It kind of absorbed our existing CHM, and Flare parsed it all out and rebuilt it with this existing files and images and table of contents structure. So right away, I already had my structure, and I could just clean it up a little bit and go from there. So that made it really easy to use. And then we have the traceable reviews. And then I didn't mention, but the automated command line generation is a real benefit that I've heard internally, especially from our team that does nightly builds and they do scripting. It really helps them out because I don't have to do all the builds myself. We can have a reliable schedule. So using the Flare's command line generation, they can just put it in their nightly scripts that build our software nightly, and it'll build documentation also. So every night there's always accessible and up-to-date documentation, at least internally, just so internal stakeholders can see how the documentation is progressing. And then we could use that for onboarding of new people as they come in. They can use that as a reference manual. Well, not just new people, but everybody. But also, when new people do come, they don't know, maybe they don't know the industry that well, they don't know our software, they don't know how to use it. So we do have a lot of tutorials in our documentation and a lot of introductory topics. And instead of having to spend a lot of time ramping these people up, you can just give them the documentation and point them to the relevant topics, and they can kind of slowly learn on their own and run through the tutorials and familiarize themselves with the software and how things plug together and how to build scenes and use these vehicles. So that's really helpful. I often get people asking me where they could find documentation, where so that they could find out new functions that they might not be familiar with, because there are little groups in the company that specialize in different areas, and sometimes when they want to learn about the other areas that they don't know too much about, they'll consult documentation. And if I'm doing my job well enough, I can just point them to the right topics, and there you go. It works internally and externally. And speaking of external, the search, I've heard from some external users that the search is something that they use a lot to find topics, because we do have, the documentation is pretty big and there's a lot of information in there, and not all users need all this information. They're really going after a certain small sector of the documentation. So they'll often use the search just to hone in on what they're looking for. And previously the search was not, like I said, it wasn't responsive. It would give false positives, but now the search is so good that they could find what they want right away. And those tutorials I mentioned are a big help to external users too, because it really takes you like a little bit of hand holding. It takes you step by step to show you how to do all kinds of different functions in the document in our software. I could quickly pull up. Where is it? I could quickly pull up our tutorials page. So there's all these different things that you could do, and so this is really helpful for people who are just starting out. They can really just get going and start using the software right away to see some of the possibilities that you could do with it.
Great. And it sounds like too, if they're not familiar with navigating through the TOC, the search is going to help get them there
Oh, for
quickly.
sure. Yeah.
So gets them there much more quickly. So now that we sort of gone over this, I know that you probably aren't stopping here. Tell us a little bit about what are some of your next steps as you sort of look into the future. Have you thought about other things you want to be doing with all of your documentation, or how you want to be taking Flare and some of the other tools?
Well, I mean, it's really handled our needs very well. So the main thing is we just continue using it to output our documentation. Everyone likes it, and it gets better all the time as we come out with new versions of our documentation or of our software. I mean, we're always finding new things we could refine and coming up with new ways to output the information. So Flare could really handle all these different changes that we're throwing at it. And making new, like I wrote here, make use of the new Flare features as they come. For example, the titles in the table of contents, that was a recent feature that I really found handy, where it will take the title from the page, the XML of the page behind the scenes. And for example, if you were to change the title of a page, you wouldn't have to go then and change the title in the table of contents. It would automatically recognize that the title changed and update. So that was a really handy feature, because sometimes we do change our titles. And also as the team grows, because right now it's just a team of one, it's just me. But as the team grows, I feel Flare is adaptable enough for multiple users to work on the same project without everyone stepping on each other's feet.
Hmm.
We could all, because in previous places I've worked in larger teams that we've used Flare and it worked fine. It worked great. Um, and it plugs in with our source control software so that I could check out our files and check them in, and Flare doesn't seem to protest. I know that there's a we don't use it, but there's a MadCap Central software that's
Hmm.
like a source control, but also plugs in with a review system, and all that kind of integrates with Flare. And I've kept an eye on that. Like I said, we haven't used it here yet, but it looks kind of interesting. So maybe move towards that too one day. I'll have to check it out. But as it is, yeah, it seems to fit all our needs. I mean, it's pretty good.
Wonderful. Well, this has been extremely helpful. Thank you so much for walking us
Oh, no
through
problem.
your process. And just for everybody on the line, feel free to use that chat window if there's any questions that are coming in. I see a couple coming in. We'll do our best to get to them. But before we get to the questions, I just want to mention to everybody, if you are currently using a database system, or you're not using anything and you're wondering, well, which direction do we go? There, on the next slide, we do have some information on a comparison. And so while you can't actually click on it here, we'll be sending out this deck to everybody that's registered, and this will be clickable. We do have a comparison guide on our website. So just some things to consider if you're looking to switch from DITA or you're looking at both. Just some things to be mindful of. You can always go to our website right now. Just pull up the search and do Flare versus DITA, and it will come up. But this will be a clickable link once you receive those slides, and you'll get direct access to that comparison guide. And then the last thing, one other thing I want to mention, if you are a new user to Flare, just a reminder, we do offer free introductory training when you purchase Flare, and also while you're trialing, you're available. It's available to you as also a recorded session as well. So it does have a value of $599, but again, you do get it free. So it's a wonderful way to onboard quickly, just to introduce you to the basics and walk through some exercises. There's files, there's a large manual that accompanies it. So you really kind of get your hands into the basics, and it really is designed to get you going with some of these concepts, particularly if you're new to a topic-based and a single source authoring approach. So just keep that in mind, and feel free to contact us here if you have any questions about what that's all about and what it looks and feels like. We can help you directly. And then the last thing we want to touch on, again, we want to thank everybody for joining. There are a few links of interest that Vrej has
Mhm.
put up here, and again, these will all be available to you after we send out the recording and the slides, so the links will be accessible. But a link to a more detailed case study is available online,
Mhm.
and also the blog post that Vrej mentioned on
Mhm.
his review flow is up there as well. And then just a little bit more about why they switched from the DITA-based approach to us. And then email is up there too if you have any questions for him.
Mhm.
But it looks like we have a few that have come in, so I'm just going to turn my attention here. And so interesting, we didn't talk about this, but do you all have any plans to do any translation or localization? Are you writing for an English only audience?
For now, it's English only. Um, at least on my side, because on the other side of the company I mentioned earlier that it's kind of in two halves. The other side, they are using some translation, but on my side, I'm not using it yet. I don't know if we have plans to use Lingo. I've used Lingo before in a previous job, and it worked great. You just get the translation files, and it plugs in very nicely to Flare. But right now, no, I don't think we have plans for that at the moment. Just English for now.
Great. And then maybe just touch a little bit more, the challenges versus how it is now in terms of reviewing content. I see some common questions about that. How much easier did it become for you to collaborate with your subject matter experts versus the old way?
Oh, well, yeah, that's actually that was the topic of I believe the first blog post I wrote, and I really urge people to check out these blog posts. I wrote for a Mad blog with the links at the end over here. But like I said previously, it would be hard copies or annotated PDFs that would come back and forth, and it's just so hard to keep track of. So what I came up with was I'm using MadCap Contributor, which is another MadCap product for my reviews. And so what I do is I wrote a post that I make sure everybody reads about how to use it. And it's very simple. They just install the free client on their machines, the subject matter experts. I mean, they install it on their side. And what I'll do is I will save the relevant topics for review, and I'll bundle it into a contributor file, and I'll send it to them. Actually, we use Jira. I'm sure some people out there are familiar with Jira for keeping track of issues and bugs. And so I have a documentation subset for Jira where my documentation tasks are listed. So what I'll do is I'll put the not Confluence, the contributor file, sorry, in Jira on the related issue, and I'll flag the subject matter expert saying, hey, could you please look this over? They'll open it on their side in contributor, and then it's very easy to annotate the pages that way because you do see it in kind of the editing mode, the way I see it when I'm writing, so they could see the content kind of in its raw form, and they could add their comments. And when they're done, they'll send it back to me. And actually, you know what? I could show quickly what it's like. So, for example, if I want to send this file as for review, I could just right-click it. I do send for review. And since I mentioned we're not using Essential, but maybe one day. But for now, what I'll do is send a review file, and I'll name it. I have a naming convention, so I'll rename it according to my convention, and I'll save it, and I'll just get a Flare contributor file out of it, and that's what I'll send, and they'll comment on that, and they'll send it back to me. And then in the file they send back to me, I'll see my content with these little blurbs along the side with the reviewer's comments, and that's how we do it. And then it's recorded, so we wanted traceability. So we have these files, these back and forth files that are saved in Jira on the issues. And if ever there was I don't know, something happened and we want to backtrack what the changes were for any page, it's all there step by step. And it's worked out really well. People seem to like it. It's easy, it's traceable. It doesn't really take much from the subject matter experts to learn how to use it. It doesn't take too much of their time, which is really the way to go. I'm sure all you tech writers out there know that sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to get people to devote their time to reviewing topics because they're too busy on their side. But you got to really make it easy. It's like a diplomacy game you have to play with the developers. So you have to make it easy for them to give you feedback, and this seems to work. If you want more detailed information, it is on the this one here. If you see on the slides, it's that blog post where I really went step by step. I even outlined the steps that that I give the subject matter experts how to go through it.
Great. And then a couple questions about the import process that maybe we can talk
Yes.
about, some common ones here. What was it like going through the Chum import? Did you lose a lot of information? Did you have to do a lot of retooling? How much manual rework was there for you, if any?
Um, there was a little bit, if I remember. Now it's going back like 3.5 years, but I remember being really happy about how easy it was. You just point to the CHM file, and it just took it and ripped it apart and built it back together. The table of contents was just as it was. The the headings, everything was there. The images, everything was there. I brought in all the files, even the folder structure was exactly as it should be with the subfolders. The files were everywhere. Yeah, in terms of the extra work that we had to do, it was mostly formatting. For example, some spacing I found was a little off, so I had to fix that. I did want to implement a new style sheet, so I did have to go in and play with that a little bit. But most of the heavy lifting was done for me. It's after that it was just some fine tuning. Like I said, we have a pretty big documentation, so it took maybe like a couple of days of just finessing it a little bit to smooth out those syntax, oh, not syntax, but spacing errors and things like that. But yeah, I'd say most of it was very easy, and I never looked back from there. Like it took me so long to find that example CHM that I showed earlier because I hadn't touched it in years. I forgot about it, and it's all for the best.
Right. A great question came in on, the look and feel. You went from the old Chum to this, beautiful looking HTML5 site.
hmm
Um, how did you come up with the template idea? Was it something that you came up with on your own? What were the color options? Did you work with a marketing team that gave you some of those those things. How did you come up with the template and the color options for your site?
Well, the colors here, the gray and the green, these are company colors. So I think it came from marketing, working with an external marketing firm also, and they developed the logo and the colors. So I'm kind of limited in what I could use there. Also the headings, the weight and the font of the headings, these are all predetermined for me, so it all fits in. Like if you go to our CM Labs website, you'll find that these colors and these fonts and the weights of these typefaces are pretty standard.
Hmm.
I didn't have much wiggle room in that regard, but otherwise, the layout of the pages, we came up with this. Me and my managers, we came up with this kind of this like box layout, just so it's very simple, clean. We're really going for a clean look. We don't like to have it all cluttered. Um, and so it repeats. So then once you get down here for this tutorial page, for example, we really want to entice people with some images of what it would look like, the final product would look like once you're in there, um, just to get them to click. But most of the pages have, if I can go back to the first page, have these little thumbnails, because also we're thinking that since it's going to be online, maybe some people at a work site might need to look at this and they might be looking at it on a laptop or a tablet. So they might be a little more constrained. So we want to have a lot of empty space. So it might look like there's a lot of empty space here when I'm looking on my big monitor at work. But you have to think like if somebody's looking at this on iPad, for example, it's going to be a little more squished together. It won't look bad, but it'll eliminate some of the white space. So we have this column down the middle that's kind of more suited for mobile, but also looks just fine on your machine, also on your web browser. Yeah.
And then it sounds like once you were able to get the colors and
Hmm.
this, the fonts, for the person who asked the question, it probably was quite easy to manipulate in the style sheet, right? Once you have the values, you can set the fonts and the colors that you're using in your style sheet quite
Oh,
easily
for
and
sure.
manage that in one place, not going into individual things, but sometimes just a matter of coming up with a style guide, or right, or knowing what you're supposed to be using if you do have that. Sometimes I know that styling and look and feel can be an iterative process, but it sounds like you had some guidelines you could plop into your style sheet and use those going
Oh
forward.
yeah, I had all the color values and all that stuff. That was all set for me. So it was just a matter of just going into the CSS file and plugging those in. And then as I'm writing, I mean, I have all my styles that are in this drop down that I have to select it. Um,
Yeah,
where is
fonts.
it? There it is. And I mean, I could just choose whatever I need from here, and it all comes from the CSS, and those all come from the colors that are provided for me. It's very simple to make your headings and just save them once, and then they're readily accessible. And I mean, if I want to change this from heading 4 to, let's say, heading 2, it's that easy, you know?
Hmm.
Once you just, it's work you just have to do once,
Yeah.
and it's done, and saves you so much time moving forward.
Particularly if marketing changes their mind, right? Or they
Yeah,
say, hey, we're
exactly.
not using, Publica Sans anymore. We're going to go
Yep.
to some Helvetica type font or something else. You
Yeah.
have a change in one place.
Well, that feeds back into the reusability, which we had a problem with in our old system, that it was hard to reuse content, it was hard to reuse styles. Whereas here, I mean, if it comes, the marketing comes one day and says, "Oh, all right, we've changed our colors and our fonts," I just have to change it in one place, and it
Mhm.
cascades throughout the whole documentation, and it's not more than a couple of minutes work at that point, instead of having to go manually, perhaps, into some other systems and do it one by one, which would be a nightmare.
Right. Great question that just came through, and maybe just for the recording and for everybody else. Maybe, we were talking about DITA, we've been talking about Chum, we've been talking about HTML5. Maybe go back, just kind of set the stage. The great question that came off between what's the difference or the relationship between DITA and Chum? Maybe just kind of explain for those who may not be familiar with what those are and how do they relate to each other.
Well, I did a lot of learning about this when I showed up, because I was not an expert and I'm not really too familiar with the whole thing at the time, and it's been a while. But when I showed up, the documentation was written in uh, XML, and specifically using a software called Oxygen. And then DITA is a different implementation of XML. And then we had a compiler called Oxygen. So we had these three stages. And for some reason that predates me, the documentation, like I said, was written in Oxygen, but the compiler wanted DITA, which was a different set of tags and everything for XML. You know, it's a different implementation of XML. So we had to run a converter from one to the other, and then the compiler had to take the DITA XML. So it has all these syntaxes that are specific to it and structural rules that you have to pay attention to when you're putting together a documentation system in the way that a page would be nested under a different page, and has all these rules that it's really looking for when you're compiling documentation. And it was just too many things to remember. I mean, like I said, I have these stacks of papers here, and I have these highlighted parts. For example, a previous tech writer left for me rules for avoiding converter problems. So defining unique IDs, make sure to match file names to topic IDs, uh, use lines for HTML line breaks, always nest your unordered lists in paragraph tags, all and on and on. All these rules that DITA is looking for. It's just too much, especially in such a huge system. And the tiniest little thing that could be off would break my generation, my
Right.
documentation generation. So it was too much.
Right. And I think some people that have made the move have described, moving to Flare does offer still some of that document structure, right? Because it's still XML,
For
without some
sure.
of the rigidity and strictness of DITA. So we
Well, I
can
mean, I
color
could show
outside the
you.
lines. Hmm.
I could flip back to my project, and so, for example, if I'm in this page here, I could always click on the text. I can always click on the text editor over here, and you can see that all the tags and everything. If you want to come here, you could still manipulate the page at the code level, and I often do. I will admit, I do come here often to change some stuff because sometimes it's just easier, especially with lists and tables. I find um, it just to fine tune some of these things. I like to pop in here and fix it, but it's nothing that you can't do from the this window over here. Um, but yeah, you still have control. If you want to go to the XML level, you still have control. You could come here, and for example, if you make a mistake, let's say I didn't close this tag, it should tell me right here what the warning is and where it is, and it really gives you an indication on how to fix it. And when you fix it, it goes away. So, like you said, it's not as rigid and it helps you out. It's a little bit of hand holding. It helps you find the problem if you've made an XML issue. And then you can just flip back and continue on your editor. What you see is what you get kind of editor over here.
Right. Yeah. So just to kind of recap that the DITA was the framework for which our content validates. And then CHUM or the .chm or Microsoft HTML help, they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the actual output file. And to clarify, Flare actually does produce the .chm. I mean, if you still need it, it's
Hmm.
available. But obviously, most people are moving to a more
Yeah.
modern, responsive HTML5 output that's cross-platform, cross-browser. You're not limited to a
Yeah.
Windows-only system like you are with CHUM. So.
Yeah, I mean, in Flare, yeah, you could output CHM, you could put out PDFs, you could put anything out. It's just that we want to go with HTML5, and this was the best way to do it. And also, you could put multiple targets. So if you want to output the same thing in slightly different ways or for different outputs, it's as easy as making a different target. And when you make your build, just choose the target you want to output as, and that's it. It's done.
And then do you have any plans now, or maybe you're doing this now, but are you doing anything by way of analytics? Are you measuring how people are, trafficking the site, or, looking at the impact, or is that something that you plan to do?
Actually, marketing has made me put some analytics scripts into the pages. Actually, I have a master page, which I'm sure most people using this have a master page. So all the other pages kind of take some basic information from the master page. So I put some analytics in that master page that's supposed to track, views, where people are coming from, this kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily have eyes on that. I know our marketing department has made me put that script in there so they would know more about that, but it is being tracked. And I'm sure they have some interesting information about that.
Well, yeah, no, it's good to understand what topics what pages are people hitting, and what
Hmm.
kind of keywords are they searching on. So that's what those types of analytics tracked. And the good thing about putting it in your master page is that all of your topics have that master page applied. So you don't have to manage that code in every single topic. You apply it to your master page,
Hmm.
which sort of stamps itself on top of your topics when you compile. So it's an easy place to
Yeah.
manage those common elements that live on
Yeah.
top of every topic.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same idea as your CSS file. You just put some information in the master page, and if you ever want to change it again, like header or information or footer information, things like that, if you ever want to change it again, you only do it in one place, and it just goes out to all the pages. So it's
Right.
really a one-stop thing, and it saves you a lot of time.
And then after you build all of your topics, you do a quick build, where do you all host your information? Are you publishing your HTML5 files to a particular web server internally, or how do you guys host your information?
It's in we're actually hosting in a couple of places. So internally, what our process is, I'll be working on new topics, for example, and then, like I said, we have source control. So once it's reviewed and we're okay with the new topic, I check it into our source control, and it becomes, quote unquote, official new information. And then I also mentioned the automated generation. So it gets put into the stream for a nightly build. And so with this automatic build, it gets built and it gets put on an internal server, but that's accessible to everybody in the company. So anybody could see the kind of documentation in progress as I'm working on it every day. And then once we release a new version of our software, like we're doing this week, we're coming out with our 2018 C version. Once the new version comes out, then we put our documentation publicly viewable on our company website, cm-labs.com, and you can find it there. And that remains the current documentation until our next version comes out. But if ever we backtrack and add a new feature to an existing software release, we do have an internal mechanism to add content into Flare, into our documentation, and then reapply it to the web, so that the web version is always current with the current release that we have put out. And while that's up, I'm already working on the next version. So I'm like right now, I'm working on our next release that'll come out in a couple months. So
Right.
I
And
kind of get,
your content's public. It's publicly available it's sort of out there for
yeah.
everybody to see. Yeah.
And
And
that's a newer thing we've done too, because I think we only started about a year ago that we put it public on the website. Before, it would be a little package that you'd have to install on your machine.
mhm.
But our, like I said, our end goal was to make it online based, and so we finally got there. So it is freely available online. You could find it.
Right, and for those who want to produce HTML5 and make it available online, even though yours is public, there are also companies who want to still produce this type of content, but they may not want it publicly available, and so that's a possibility too. So while you have it public, for those on the call, just so you know that that's an option too. You can always publish your HTML5 sites to a web server that's maybe not public for the world to see. And that way
Oh
you
yeah.
can put whatever kind of security protocols you want in front of that information. If it has to be password protected, you don't have to necessarily put it on an end user's machine. You could put it on a I call it a private web server. There's probably
Hmm.
a more technical way to describe it, but some place that requires the end user to authenticate before they get to the information. It's not out there on the World Wide Web to
Right.
see. So you can go both ways with
I
Flare
mean,
content.
yeah, just because the nature of the HTML5 is that it's so flexible. You could put it anywhere. You could put HTML file. So if you want to keep it internal, you could keep it internal, but it's still easy to access in your browser. Or if you want it public facing, you could put it public facing. It's very flexible in that way. So,
Right. And you could even have people install it local to their desktop machines and
hmm.
just have a browser, whatever browser on whatever browser they've got will be the viewer for these files. So
Yep.
that's an option too. So
Because
it
we
doesn't
also
have to.
offer that. We do also offer that for our clients. They could install it if they want locally on their machine and not have to access it. Because, like I said, sometimes they're on work sites, they might not have internet access, so they'd have to install it on their machine to have it. And yeah, that's another option. It's very flexible.
Wonderful. Well, we're kind of coming upon the end of the hour here, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank everybody for their fantastic questions. Fresh, thanks so much for walking through this with us today. And
No
just a
problem.
reminder for everyone, we will be sending this out, as I said in the beginning. So look for some correspondence from us the next day or so. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest
Mhm.
of the week, and I hope to see you all on the next webinar. And Fresh, thanks again for taking us through it. Great job.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.